14 Homeland Security spending bill, $47 billion, which includes $5.6 billion for emergency disaster relief, and it increases by 7% funding for Customs and Border Protection. Votes later today. Now live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Reverend Thomas Elliott, Canon United Methodist Church, Snellville, Georgia.
Let us pray. Gracious God, you are the hope and end of all creation. Through your love and mercy, you give us life and freedom. You bless us with an abundance of resources. You invite us to faith. We thank you for your presence and pray that you will guide us in the work you seek to accomplish. Forgive us our indulgences and selfishness. Remove the prejudice, hatred, and contempt that divide us. Govern our thoughts with liberty and justice for all. Make us mindful of the needs of all peoples. Transform our economic woes. Influence our decisions. Free us from terrorism and war. Reveal your will to us. Today we pray for our nation, our President, and this Congress, the military and citizens, the less fortunate, and peoples of the earth. Turn our hearts to you, that we may serve this day with compassion, justice, courage, and peace. In Jesus' name, amen.
The Chair has examined a journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Mr. Speaker, members, and guests in the gallery, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce my colleagues to Dr. Tom Elliott. Not only is he our guest chaplain today and the senior pastor at Canon United Methodist Church in Snellville in my district, he was also my youth minister growing up in Decatur, Georgia. For over 30 years, I've known Tom. He's here today with his wife, Kelly. He is all surrounded in love by his daughter, Lucy, and his son, Thomas. He has a love of the Lord, and that's a love that he shares in the pulpit on Sunday morning, and a love that you can find expressed in music at coffee houses around the district in his Wild at Heart band nights during the week. It's my great pleasure to have Tom with us today. I thank you for your service to our community, Tom, and I thank you for your service to the Lord. I yield back.
The Chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I rise today in strong opposition to the recent Supreme Court decision in Maryland versus King. As Justice Scalia warned in his brilliant dissent, a consequence of this week's ruling is that your DNA can now be taken and entered into a national DNA database if you are ever arrested, rightly or wrongly, or for whatever reason. On the day I was sworn in, I pledged that I would be a staunch defender of individual liberties and of our Constitution, an unwavering advocate for freedom. This includes upholding the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution that protects us against unreasonable search and seizures. I strongly disagree with the 5 justices in this case who held that DNA collection is just another metric of identification, like a name or fingerprint. It is not. It's an intrusive invasion of privacy and property that should never be allowed before a person has even been tried, convicted, or served a warrant. As my Senate colleague Ted Cruz warned, unchecked government power and intrusive personal databases pose real risks to our liberty. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Arizona seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we are nearing the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, yet too many women continue to struggle. Too many women still don't receive equal pay for equal work. 50 years after President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act, women still earn only 77 cents for every dollar earned by men. That is not only wrong, it's bad for our economy. Working families often rely on 2 incomes, and more households have women as the primary source of income. That means women's take-home pay must cover the rent, the groceries, the doctor's visits, and when women succeed, our families succeed. So does our economy. I was proud to cast my first vote in Congress for the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which restored women's right to challenge unfair pay in court. But there's more work to do. Over the past 50 years, the Equal Pay Act has never been updated or strengthened. That's where the Paycheck Fairness Act comes in. It strengthens and closes loopholes in the law. So let's get this done and send an important message that work is work, no matter who is doing it. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I am honored to represent the great state of Utah and Salt Lake City. Forbes magazine recently rated Utah as the best state in the nation for business and careers. And Salt Lake City was recently ranked as the best city in the country for new graduates. But while the state of Utah is doing very well, the rest of our nation is not. As a small business owner, I know that government does not create jobs, the private sector creates jobs. And businessmen all over this nation are asking, no, they're even begging for one thing: get government out of the way. Allow our economy to grow. Create new American jobs. Expand opportunity. Don't expand government. There are right now 4.4 million Americans that have been jobless for more than 6 months, and this is completely unacceptable. We must simplify our tax code. We need to become energy independent. We need to move forward with projects such as the Keystone Pipeline. We need to reform health care and entitlement programs, which account for the vast majority of our deficit and debt spending. Americans deserve better. We can do better. I yield back now my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 885 days since I arrived in Congress, and the Republican leadership has still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. Now this Congress is pretending our unemployment crisis is completely over. This Congress is acting as though surface scandals and a now rapidly shrinking budget deficit are the only issues that matter to this country. Try telling that to any of the 12 million unemployed Americans who are today struggling to keep their homes and to pay for their food and health care. Try telling that to any of the 3 million Americans who have been unemployed for more than a year and are facing the indescribably painful possibility that they will never work again. Mr. Speaker, unemployment is the nation's true deficit. Let's pass the Jobs Now Act and the President's American Jobs Act to end it. Our mantra of this Congress should be jobs, jobs, jobs.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The First Amendment is under attack in Madison, Indiana. One of my constituents, Bill Grody, is a profile in courage as he litigates against the government's attempt to force him to violate his First Amendment rights and comply with Obamacare's contraceptive mandate. Churches deserve protection from this mandate, but private businesses deserve, and business owners deserve protection too. Mr. Grody is not alone. Some businesses may choose to close their doors instead of complying. Others may be fined out of business. Ask yourself, if the federal government can make Mr. Grody purchase a product in violation of his religious beliefs, what can it do to you? I applaud Mr. Grody's courage and urge the House to pass the Health Care Conscious Rights Act to stop this attack on religious liberty. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask to address the body for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
This June, as we celebrate LGBT Pride Month, LGBT Americans have much to celebrate. Every day, this country moves closer and closer towards embracing full equality for all of its citizens. And yet, the path to equality and justice saw a setback last week when one of our nation's largest companies chose to deny fundamental workplace protections for its employees. For the 14th year in a row, ExxonMobil's shareholders voted to strike down a proposal that would specifically prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a company that has received more than $1 billion in government contracts over the last decade. Simply put, the government should not be in business with companies that discriminate. Exxon's decision makes it part of a shrinking minority. 88% of Fortune 500 companies specifically ban employee discrimination based on sexual orientation. BP doesn't discriminate, Chevron doesn't discriminate, Shell Oil doesn't discriminate, but ExxonMobil does, and their anti-equality policies should start to hurt their bottom line. Unfortunately, it is still legal to fire someone in 29 states based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. ExxonMobil's backwards decision highlights why we need to pass a comprehensive Employee Non-Discrimination Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, all Americans are aware how our current tax code is too complex and punishes people who save, invest, and achieve economic success. However, the recent news coming from the IRS illustrates another pressing reason for tax reform. Our current tax code puts too much power and potential for abuse into the hands of unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats. The American people deserve a tax system that cannot be a political weapon to be used against them. That is why I'm a proud co-sponsor of the fair tax. The fair tax would eliminate the IRS by replacing the current tax code with a simple consumption-based tax. The fair tax would be collected equally from all Americans with no opportunity for the government to attack or discriminate against innocent citizens. The fair tax is a reform measure that offers a rare chance to unleash economic growth, create good jobs, and at the same time protect the rights of American people. I urge this body to swiftly pass the fair tax. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Oregon seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 50 years ago, the Equal Pay Act passed in Congress with strong bipartisan support, and it should be no surprise. It makes sense. Back in 1963, 201 Democrats joined with 160 Republicans to support equal pay for equal work. Only 9 members voted no. Back then, women earned just 59 cents for every dollar men earned, and today we're still 23 cents short on the promise of equal pay. Half a century later, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make for the same work. The Paycheck Fairness Act would strengthen the Equal Pay Act, giving women the paychecks they deserve and have earned. It would eliminate the loopholes and carve-outs that have denied women basic fairness for decades. As we celebrate the passage of the Equal Pay Act, let's hope for a return to bipartisanship and common sense. Let's make sure that women are paid what they deserve and pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. Equal pay was bipartisan 50 years ago. It should be bipartisan today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, our top priority in Congress should be to promote job creation and healthy economy. Too many Americans are struggling. The unemployment rate remains too high. The labor force participation rate continues to drop, and the national debt still is nearly $17 trillion. This is due to the administration's failed economic and overreaching regulatory policies. Wasteful government spending and higher taxes are not the answers the American people are looking for. America needs real solutions for economic recovery. In order for all Americans to thrive, we need jobs. Over 60% of new jobs in our country are generated by small businesses, which have always been the backbone of our economy. Many small business owners are holding off hiring new workers because they're uncertain of higher taxes. More government red tape, more regulations. We must remove unnecessary regulation. We need to promote real solutions that heal our economy and create new jobs. Americans share the same goal, a healthy economy and positive future, and we need to keep the American dream alive for future generations. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this week the House will take up Homeland Security appropriations legislation for fiscal year 2014. Unfortunately, this legislation once again limits the number of cities in the Urban Area Security Initiative program to 25. This is unacceptable and excludes many cities that have been determined to be a high risk of a terror threat. The Buffalo-Niagara region, which I represent, includes 4 international border crossings and the busiest passenger crossing along the northern border with Canada, the largest electricity producer in New York State, and within a 500-mile radius of 55% of the American population and 62% of the Canadian population. Recently, authorities thwarted a terror plot in which the target is thought to have been a bridge in Niagara Falls. It is unthinkable that this bill would exclude Buffalo from this important program that it was once eligible for. Mr. Speaker, protecting the homeland should be a federal government priority. We should be doing more, not less, to protect our most vulnerable cities, including returning cities to this program, ensuring that we maintain the capabilities gained under the program. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the First Amendment of our Constitution is first because nothing is more important to secure liberty and freedom of speech and freedom of the press than our First Amendment. And there are currently 2 scandals that put into question the President's commitment to this sacred freedom, with the Justice Department secretly obtaining phone records of reporters at the Associated Press and Fox News, and the IRS targeting certain groups because of their political beliefs. Yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee held a hearing with the victims of the IRS abuse, and we learned that IRS officials not only asked many appropriate questions to members of these groups, like what books they read or what was in their prayers, but also tried to tell free Americans who they could not protest against or even illegally released private tax records to groups with opposing viewpoints. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press should never be in question in this nation, Mr. Speaker, and certainly we can all agree that units of the federal government should never use their powers to punish Americans simply because of their ideas. This House will get to the bottom of this issue by following the facts, free Americans, these free people, our great patriots, deserve no less. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, and I rise to urge my colleagues to strengthen that law by passing the Paycheck Fairness Act. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Paycheck Fairness Act because even today, working women in my district in Georgia and across the country earn on average 77 cents for every dollar that men earn for the same work. That's because the penalties under the current law aren't strong enough to deter employers from breaking the law. And the current law doesn't protect employees from retaliation for sharing salary information with co-workers. The Paycheck Fairness Act will plug these loopholes in the law. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand here today with so many of my colleagues to call for the passage of these long overdue improvements in this landmark law. Every day we ignore the shortcomings of the law is another day we deny women their rights under the law, and that should end right now. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek
I
recognition?
ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss Obamacare's assault on jobs and full-time employment. The law is costing wages that are important to families in these tough economic times. I received an email from a constituent in my district who's a teacher's assistant. Because of the 30 hours that is considered full-time employment in the Affordable Care Act, her hours have been cut to 28 hours a week along with all of her colleagues. She stated, "I don't even need health insurance. I get it through my husband's employment, but because of this bill, I will be losing money that my family needs and depends on." Indiana is also home to over 300 medical device companies with an economic impact of over $10 billion a year. Companies in Indiana, like Cook Medical, have already scrapped plans for expansion in the state, citing the 2.3% medical device tax. Yesterday, I discussed with Secretary Sebelius the vote in the Senate, 79 to 20, and the vote in the last House Congress, 270 to 146, including 37 Democrats, to repeal the law, but the administration sticks by the fact that they do not want the law, that part of the law repealed. Mr. Speaker, this administration is telling Americans for the last 5 years they're trying to create jobs, but they're refusing to acknowledge the jobs that are being lost because of their health care bill. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, by 2018, 63% of all American job openings are going to require some sort of post-high school education. Workers who hold bachelor's degrees make on average double the people who don't have bachelor's degrees. Now, if we fail to take responsible action this month, student loan rates are going to double on 7.4 million American students. At a time when other interest rates are at historic lows, this body passed H.R. 1911, a bill that would make college more expensive. I urge this body to pass H.R. 1433 to hold interest rates where they are in order to broaden opportunities and allow everybody a piece of the American dream. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I rise to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor an educator, leader, author, and role model for young men in Pennsylvania. This week, Dr. Joseph Cox will preside over his final commencement ceremony as headmaster of the Haverford School, a secondary school for boys in Haverford Township, Delaware County. Dr. Cox took office as Haverford's headmaster in 1998, and since then, he has led the school and its faculty with his firm belief that teachers and boys must be firm, fair, funny, focused, and friendly. These qualities were the backbone of Dr. Cox's philosophy of teaching. Dr. Cox has set a long example for men outside the classroom as well. He's a 30-year Army veteran serving his country in Vietnam, commanding a battalion of the famous 101st Airborne Division and retiring as a colonel. A warrior, a poet, a cultivator of the minds of young men,
and a sculptor of their character by his example. He leaves the institution not just better than he found it, but he leaves the lives he has touched so much richer for the experience of working with him and learning by his side. Dr. Cox, you are in every measure what it means to be a teacher. Your community thanks you. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to recognize a very talented group of students from the beautiful island of Molokai in my district. Last week I had a chance to meet with the Molokai Middle School's Golden Eyes robotics team. Beating out 52 other teams, the Golden Eyes took first place at the Hawaii First LEGO League Championship in December 2012 and recently attended a national invitational. The First LEGO League is a robotics program created to get students excited about science and technology. The team members included Eric Svetin, Lily Jenkins, Noah Chianini, Katie Domingo, Kale Manley, and Caitlin DeRuin, with great coaches David Gonzalez and Jennifer Whitted. Together they researched and developed conceptual glasses using face recognition software to help the elderly remember the people that they met. They researched age-related memory loss and put in 600 hours of research and practice to prepare for the competition, and they're now applying for a patent. I'm so proud of these young people as they represent the great talent that exists in our state of Hawaii, and they are who give me hope for our bright future. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to commemorate the life of an outstanding American, Viola Ergin, who passed away on May 21st. She was an American whose life has touched and will touch many Americans for generations to come. Mrs. Ergin was the daughter of Finnish and Swiss immigrants. She graduated high school at age 15 and was the first female to earn a BAA in accounting from the University of Minnesota. After graduation, she and her husband, Bill, moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 1947. As a dedicated mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, she was still volunteering well into her 97th year. Her commitment to excellence in everything she did is reflected in the lives of her 5 children and 15 grandchildren who span this nation as business leaders, doctors, and volunteers in a number of fields. It is impossible to measure the number of people whose lives will be touched by her time on earth. Her work over 40 years in helping Oak Ridge Children's Museum become one of the nation's finest museums reflects her commitment to helping others. Mrs. Ergin was an extraordinary person who excelled in an extraordinary generation. She was a great Tennessean who gave her life tirelessly to her family, friends, and community. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of equal pay for equal work for women. June 10th marks the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act. In 1963, when the Equal Pay Act was passed, women made 59 cents to the dollar that men made. 50 years later, women are still paid significantly less than men for their same work. Today, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make. Equal pay should not only be viewed as an issue of fairness, it is also an economic issue. The yearly gap of $8,200 the Sacramento women face could have been put to use paying off student loans as part of a down payment for a new home or invested for their retirement. Paycheck fairness puts the money that women may have rightfully earned into their pockets where it belongs. That's why I support the Paycheck Fairness Act and urge my colleagues to support this important legislation as well. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Committee on Education and the Workforce heard testimony from Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. Despite a mountain of the facts to the contrary, she told the committee that the concerns of employers have with the health care law are mere speculation. I don't know who the Secretary is talking to in Washington, but the reality for employers out in the real world is there is no speculation when it comes to the job-crushing effects of Obamacare. Where I live in North Carolina, Obamacare is destroying jobs and forcing full-time workers to accept part-time hours, and that's just the start. I recently hosted a field hearing in my district where I heard from a business owner who, prior to Obamacare, was able to offer some of the best medical, dental, and vision care in the area at a cost of only 20% to his employees. Sadly, this same company is now subject to higher premiums, higher Medicare taxes, higher investment taxes, and greater administrative burdens. All this will divert resources from new training, new equipment, and better wages. Mr. Speaker, what I see are the facts and not speculation, and that's why I'm adamant that we need to repeal this terrible law. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
On the floor for 1 minute, if I can extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act. This law was the very first step to closing the gender wage gap. It was also a statement about our values, that women and men deserve equal pay for equal work. But 50 years later, women continue to be devalued. Equal pay is not only a woman's issue, it's a family issue. Families rely on women's wages to make ends meet, and the extra $11,000 a woman would make each year if she was fairly compensated has real value. It could pay for a year and a half of child care or feed a family of 4 with money to spare. Every dollar matters for hardworking women and families. What's better than the Equal Pay Act's 50th anniversary, a Paycheck Fairness Act birthday? It's time the Paycheck Fairness Act got a vote. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address the need for reforming our current sugar program. This uncompetitive, outdated policy is stunning job creation and is harmful for families, candy companies, and food manufacturers that are forced to pay a higher cost for any product made with sugar. Recent data suggests that without reform, the program puts 600,000 jobs in the sugar-using industries at risk. I became all too aware of this negative impact during a visit at a leading confectioner located in my district. Headquartered in Bryan, Ohio, Spangler Candy Company is a family-owned business that has been providing consumers with Dum-Dums, candy canes, and other confections since 1906. This company currently has over 400 employees, but if it could purchase sugar at world market prices instead of an inflated price, the number of employees would be closer to 600. This is a difference of 200 manufacturing jobs in a single Midwestern town. Imagine the positive economic growth that would result from sugar reform nationwide. I'm an original co-sponsor of H.R. 693, the Sugar Reform Act. Reform to the sugar program will restore fairness in the sugar market, encourage investment, and spur job creation in our local communities. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to Patricia Knudsen, the first Latina to be promoted to the rank of Chief Deputy in Riverside County. Instrumental in fostering relationships within our community, Patricia has served at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department for 24 years. Patricia started her law enforcement career at the Robert Presley Detention Center. For the last 2 decades, she's continued to serve in a variety of roles within the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. She now moves from her current position as the commander of the Robert Presley Detention Center to become Chief Deputy of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Always actively engaged in the community, Chief Deputy Knudsen founded Life Path Vision, a group that works with Riverside Police Foundation to mentor youth. Never ceasing to help those in need, Patricia also volunteers and serves on boards and committees of a number of nonprofit organizations in the community. As a role model and mentor herself, Chief Deputy Knudsen firmly believes it's everyone's responsibility to mentor youth to be successful adults. With her unparalleled passion for service, Patricia Knudsen is a role model for us all. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday during a hearing on the Education and Workforce Committee, Secretary Sebelius dismissed concerns regarding the impact of the Affordable Care Act will have on small businesses as speculation. But in my district and all across this country, the negative impact of this law is a sad reality. I've held field hearings in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and most recently North Carolina to hear directly from the job creators and about how they will have to cut hours and hire fewer employees because of the Affordable Care Act. And just this past Sunday, my hometown paper, the Johnson City Press, ran an advertisement from a Burger King franchisee owner announcing that he was being forced to close one of his stores as a result of, among other things, and quote, a law so unfriendly to business and workers it forces the business to limit hard-working Americans to less hours and lower pay at a time of high unemployment, less opportunity for people to prevail, end quotes. This entrepreneur wants to grow his business, not shrink it. But instead, we're limiting his opportunities and those of Tennesseans that he would employ. Speculation? I hardly think so. We can and must do better. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Question unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, when women succeed, our economy grows, our communities prosper, and our nation thrives. And yet, 50 years after President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law, some in Congress seem content to let the pay gap between men and women continue. Back in 1963, women earned 59 cents on average for every dollar a man took home. President Kennedy called that unconscionable. Meanwhile, about 1 in 10 mothers were their family's primary breadwinners. 5 decades later, the number of female breadwinners has quadrupled. And yet women take home only 77 cents for every dollar a man earns for the same job. In 50 years, we've made 18 cents of progress. Congress hasn't updated the Equal Pay Act since President Kennedy signed it into law. The Paycheck Fairness Act would strengthen that law, adapt to a much different American workplace than what we had in the 60s, and put us back on a pathway to pay equity in the workforce. Equal pay isn't a women's issue. It's a family issue, it's an economic issue, it's a community issue, and it's also an issue that Congress has ignored. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the Paycheck Fairness Act and help guarantee equal pay for equal work. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we have a jobs crisis in this country. Millions of Americans are out of work, and yet many jobs go unfulfilled. This is especially true among young people. Part of the problem is that young Americans are faced with uncertainty when investing in college education due to government price fixing of student loan interest rates. While some in this chamber think that's a good thing, others do not. And we passed a bill on that just 2 weeks ago. That is why House Republicans passed the Smarter Solutions for Students Act. It stops student loan rates from doubling in July, fixes the student loan process long term, and takes politicians out of the business of setting interest rates by moving to a market-based system. And as a member of the Budget Committee, I'll note that these are many of the same, and actually the very same principles the President called for in his own budget plan. We are offering the President a perfect opportunity for a true bipartisan victory. And not only is it a bipartisan victory, it is a real solution to a real problem. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
And without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
On June 10, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed the bipartisan Equal Pay Act, which requires equal pay for equal work. Great idea, but 50 years later, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make, a yearly gap of over $11,000 between working men and women. Women of color earn even less. Does anyone think that if this Congress were a majority women, that this bill would still be stonewalled from even being debated in this House and by this Republican majority? We'd debate the Paycheck Fairness Act right away. Since most American families rely on women's wages, the pay gap means $11,000 less every year for their groceries, rent, and doctor visits, and that affects a lifetime, resulting in lower pensions and Social Security benefits. 50 years, a half a century, is far too long for women to wait for paycheck fairness. Here's a little warning. Women may not be a majority here now, but we are a majority of voters. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition? And without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, every day we talk about the need to cut spending and government waste in order to promote economic stability and grow our economy. Well, I've introduced a bill that will do just that. The SAVE Act would cut $200 billion over 10 years by eliminating the duplicative and inefficient spending within the government. This bill has already received bipartisan support. In fact, these cuts were outlined in the President's own GAO report. They include cutting $137 million by eliminating duplicative catfish studies, saving taxpayers $33 billion by reducing Medicare and Medicaid fraud and abuse, forcing government agencies to act more like the private sector with contract bidding, saving taxpayers $80 billion. These are common sense and practical cuts, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the SAVE Act.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Unanimous consent from the House to speak for 1 minute and to revise and expand.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to a remarkable individual and prolific inventor whose pioneering research into medical imaging has helped to transform modern-day medicine. Dr. Tryphon Lascaris, a chief scientist at General Electric's Global Research Center, was recently awarded his 200th United States patent, a benchmark previously reached by only one other GE researcher, the inventor of the light bulb and founder of the company's research center, Thomas Edison. For the past 4 decades, Dr. Lascaris has worked at GE Global Research on technology to advance magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. MRI would not be where it is today, a vital diagnostic tool used in hospitals around the world. There is no telling how many millions of people are leading healthier lives today because of the technology that Dr. Lascaris developed. I congratulate Dr. Tryphon Lascaris on this milestone achievement, and on behalf of this body and the citizens of the 20th Congressional District of New York, I thank him for his lifelong dedication to scientific research in the service of humanity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainty and stability, it's really all that our business owners are asking for from us here in the government so they can grow and create jobs. Instead, we handed them Obamacare, a nightmare for people who own a business or who are trying to start up their own business. But worse, it is a nightmare for you and your family. It's not fair for you, for your kids, your grandkids. Obamacare will and is cutting your wages, your hours. It may even cost you your job, and it's weakening our social safety net. And in the big picture, ask yourself, when it comes to your health care, who knows how to care for you and your family most? You or some stranger here in Washington? Obamacare is bad for business, putting 3 million American jobs in jeopardy, and that is not speculation, Secretary Sebelius. It's plain and simple. The Affordable Health Care Act is not affordable. It's not about your health. It's not about care, and it is not fair. It's not fair to our seniors, our kids, our grandkids, or for you. Thank you. I yield my time, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Over the last 50 years, women have broken barriers in business, science, education, and government. Yet they today also account for half of the workers in the country. But still, they earn less for equal work. In Nevada, the average woman still makes only 85 cents for every dollar that men earn, amounting to a yearly gap of $6,300 between full-time working men and women. Collectively, Nevada women are losing some $2.3 billion each year due to this pay gap. The pay gap not only harms individual women, but it hurts their families and our communities. It is an economic drag, a social calamity, and a moral injustice. In a country where we strive for equal opportunity, this is simply unacceptable. That's why it's so important that we pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. This critical piece of legislation would update and strengthen the Equal Pay Act and help women fight wage discrimination. The issue is simple. Women should receive equal pay for equal work, and the Paycheck Fairness Act would provide the tools to reach that goal. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on consideration of H.R. 2217, and that I may include tabular material on the same.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 243 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2217. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rowe, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 2217, which the clerk will report by title.
Appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2014, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Carter, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, will each control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, it was 69 years ago this Thursday that more than 9,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded during the D-Day invasion in Normandy, France. That courageous operation, as well as the sacrifice of so many brave individuals, serves as a sobering reminder that freedom and security are, in fact, not free. It is this solemn commitment to both freedom and security that I respectfully present to the People's House the fiscal year 2014 appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Similar to our subcommittee's work over the past 3 fiscal years, this bill demonstrates how we can fund vital security programs and enforce the law while also reducing discretionary spending overall. So this bill is about our security and fiscal priorities and getting them right. The President's fiscal year 2014 budget proposal for DHS presents a harmful budget for our frontline Homeland Security agencies, diminishing their operational workforce and undermining mission capabilities. The end result of the President's budget proposal would undoubtedly be a less capable DHS. That's why our subcommittee, on a bipartisan basis, strove to significantly improve the flawed budget request through this bill before the House today. First, this bill targets the very programs and systems displayed during the recent horrific attack at the Boston Marathon. It does this by nearly a 20% increase in the request for FEMA first responder grants, substantial increases above the request and last year's level for CBP, targeting TSA secure flight and ICE visa enforcement programs, including the phase-in of 1,600 additional CBP officers. Doubling the Department's bombing prevention program, substantially increasing counter-IED training, and applying the lessons learned from our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. A nearly 40% increase in the program, If You See Something, Say Something. In addition, the bill restores virtually all the unjustified proposed cuts to DHS's operational programs, to include restoring the cuts to ICE, mandated 34,000 detention beds, and vital investigatory programs, restoring the cuts to the Coast Guard's operational expenses, including aviation and flight hours, as well as restoring the President's truly harmful cuts to recapitalization and acquisition of cutter and aviation assets, restoring the proposed cuts to CBP, air and marine operation hours and procurement, as well as mission support functions, restoring the long-term cuts to Secret Service staffing and financial crime investigations, and providing these restorations while also strongly supporting the Department's disaster relief, cyber security, and research programs, including a full year's construction increment for the National Agro and Bio Defense Facility in Kansas. But this bill is also considers our nation's fiscal crisis by invoking real fiscal discipline and efficiency, including a more than $613 million, or more than 1.5% reduction below fiscal year 2013 in the Department's annual budget, a 15% cut below the request to DHS headquarters staffing, a nearly 25% cut below the request to departmental administrative expenses and bureaucratic overhead, denial of the President's request to increase bureaucracy by creating three new headquarters offices, termination of funding for ineffectual offices and programs, and a substantial oversight requirements ranging from withholding funds to statutory mandates to reporting requirements on everything from major acquisitions to ammunition inventories, purchases, and usage. Mr. Chairman, this bill does not represent a false choice between fiscal responsibility and security. Both are urgent priorities, and both are vigorously addressed by this bill. I must note that DHS did a shameful job in complying with statutory requirements enacted into law FY13. Those failures are certainly addressed in this bill. We are serious about compelling the departments to both enforce the law and comply with the law, and we will not tolerate further failures in this regard, a point I think we make clear in this bill through 50% withholdings to the Department's executive offices and 50% reductions to offices that are delaying the review and submittal of needed factual and informational requests by Congress. On a final and regrettably sober note, my staff and I have been regularly talking with our dear friend and my classmate, Tom Cole, doing all that we can to help the good people of Oklahoma and his district get back on their feet from the devastating tornado that hit the town of Moore and surrounding communities. So in addition to nearly $11 billion that is currently in FEMA coffers, this bill fully supports the known requirements of $6.2 billion for disaster relief fund in FY14. These funds, combined with our continued oversight, will help ensure disaster assistance rapidly gets to those who've lost so much. Mr. Chairman, we send Tom and his constituents our sincere condolences and wish them a speedy recovery. In closing, let me first thank Ranking Member Price for his statesmanship and partnership. I sincerely thank him and his dedicated professional staff for their input and notable contributions to this bill. In addition, let me thank thoughtful members of the body. We received program submissions from 222 members, and their input was critical to our oversight work over the past few months, as well as the production of this bill. I know that my staff and I made every effort to accommodate virtually every member's submission we received, and that has only made this a stronger product. Finally, I must thank distinguished chairman and ranking members of the full committee, Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy. Their input and support for the bill is genuinely appreciated. I sincerely believe this bill reflects our best effort to address our nation's urgent needs, security and enforcement, and fiscal restraint. I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the fiscal year 2014 Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Bill, and I'm pleased that we're bringing this bill to the House floor under an open rule. I want to commend Chairman Carter for the open, collaborative, and bipartisan process he has led this spring. There's a long history of bipartisan cooperation on this subcommittee that's critical for allowing us to focus on the nation's domestic security needs. The funding allocation provided to the subcommittee hews closely to the overall spending figure requested by the President for the Department of Homeland Security. But I don't believe either number is fully adequate to provide DHS with the resources it needs to help keep the nation safe. We have been able to fill a number of significant holes in the President's budget request, but this has necessitated creating some shortfalls in other areas. I want to make clear, however, that my support of Chairman Carter's efforts in no way are an endorsement of the overall discretionary spending caps adopted by the majority in the House budget resolution. Sequestration was intended to be a mechanism to force the parties to come together to address our long-term fiscal challenges. It was never meant in itself to be a tool for deficit reduction, and it certainly was never meant to be the basis for a discretionary spending cap on a budget resolution. While not quite sufficient, our allocation is still better than most of the other domestic appropriations bills, which will struggle to appropriately fund critical priorities such as medical and energy research, law enforcement and the justice system, and investments in education and infrastructure. Our Homeland Security bill is not the only bill that deals with our country's strength and security. And the allocations provided to these other subcommittees by the Ryan budget will put that strength and security at grave risk. That being said, and given the low 302B allocation this subcommittee had to work with, I applaud the chairman and the staff for addressing a number of democratic priorities, including first responders and anti-terrorism grants, as well as providing increases above the request for frontline DHS employees so that they can continue to conduct critical operations along our borders, protect our nation's airports, seaports, and land ports of entry, and respond to natural disasters across the country. Right before last year's markup, we were reminded of the threats facing our nation when the intelligence community thwarted an attempt to place a non-metallic, improvised explosive device on an aircraft bound for the United States. This year, following the terrorist attacks in Boston, we're forced to confront the tragic reality that these threats remain constant, that terrorists remain determined to attack the homeland, and they will devise more and more perverse ways to kill and harm innocent people. This requires DHS and the intelligence community and local first responders to remain vigilant and to strive continually to optimize their scarce resources. That's why I'm pleased this bill increases funding for critical grant programs, while once again rejecting the administration's insufficiently articulated proposal to re-engineer the grant structure, a proposal that has not been authorized. Specifically, the bill includes $1.5 billion for FEMA, state and local grants, an increase of $35 million over the fiscal 13 appropriated level, and it keeps both fire grants and emergency performance grants level with fiscal 13. The bill also doubles the requested funding for the Office of Bombing Prevention to accelerate planning, training, and awareness programs to help detect and respond to IEDs and other explosive devices. Equally important, the bill provides a $16.9 million increase in funding for research and development efforts at the Science and Technology Directorate. When you combine this funding with what was included in the fiscal 13 bill, in the final bill, we've made significant progress since fiscal year 2012, providing funding for high-priority research efforts and some new projects as well. The bill also provides substantial funding, $404 million, for construction of the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, a laboratory that's essential to our ability to help prevent and respond to animal disease threats. The bill also increases funding for critical Coast Guard and CBP and marine acquisitions to recapitalize aging assets, while also bringing the latest aviation and vessel technologies online to ensure our frontline personnel can operate more effectively, improving on the administration's request on each of those fronts. I'm also pleased that the bill provides funding for an additional 1,600 Customs and Border Protection officials requested by the administration, and for substantially strengthened cybersecurity protective efforts. These efforts are absolutely necessary to monitor and detect intrusions to our federal networks and protect them from foreign espionage and cyber attacks. Finally, I commend Chairman Carter for providing the requested amount, $6.22 billion, for the Disaster Relief Fund, which will ensure that there are sufficient disaster relief resources moving into the coming fiscal year. And I echo the Chairman's pledge of support for Representative Tom Cole, for his constituents and the other people of Oklahoma to fully address their needs. I also want to remind my colleagues, however, that should emergency disaster relief funding become necessary beyond what we have budgeted, Congress must respond immediately and effectively without distracting fights over budget policy. I do have some concerns with the bill, notably some of the immigration provisions. The bill once again sets an arbitrary minimum of 34,000 ICE detention beds, denying ICE the flexibility it needs to manage its enforcement and removal resources in response to changing circumstances, and to use cheaper alternative forms of supervision where that's appropriate. The bill also unnecessarily and wastefully continues the 287G program, which was designed to secure local law enforcement participation in immigration enforcement. In addition to being seriously flawed, this program has become obsolete with the full implementation of the Secure Communities program. I also must note my concern with some of the withholdings in the bill. I understand the need to give incentives to the Department to respect reporting deadlines established by the committee, but I hope we can temper some of these withholdings as we move through the process, as they do have the potential to seriously undermine the Department's management functions. The bill also provides no funding for the new DHS headquarters, despite $105 million in the request. Now, we've been told repeatedly by the administration that deferring these investments will greatly increase the project's cost, and eventually it's bound to affect frontline operations. And I believe they're correct on both counts. I also want to note my strong objection to 3 general provisions related to abortion services for detainees that were added to the bill in full committee. While they have no impact on ICE policies, they unnecessarily interject a divisive issue into the bill, distracting us from what should be our focus and straying far outside the lines of the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee. So, Mr. Chairman, while I support the bill as reported to the House by the Appropriations Committee and believe it represents an improvement over the budget request, it still falls short of the bill I believe we would want to craft were we operating under a more adequate allocation. Let me also express the hope going into this debate that this year we can avoid loading the bill up here on the floor with controversial and unnecessary policy riders. There will be a time and a place to debate immigration reform, and the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill should not be caught up in that process. In closing, I, too, want to express my appreciation for the hardworking and dedicated staff on both sides of the aisle. In the course of just 2 months, they have diligently wrapped up the Fiscal 13 bill, digested and analyzed the President's Fiscal 14 request, and crafted the bipartisan measure before us. Thanks to Ben Nicholson, Chris Mallard, Cornell Teague, Valerie Baldwin, Pam Williams, and Hillary May on the majority side, and of course Derek Newby and Justin Wien on our side of the aisle. With that, I urge approval of the bill and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume to the Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Hal Rogers, from the great state of Kentucky, who is the former founding chairman of this subcommittee and a former great prosecutor from the great state of Kentucky.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman for yielding the time. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this bill. First, I'd like to thank